Thanks, everyone. So the second panel of the day is going to be about advertising models. So it's kind of interesting here. We had all those experimentalists with these clean controls telling us about that as being a real sure way to get causality. And now the modelers are going to get up here and tell us what they can do with the observational data. So I'm excited to see that happen. Moderating the second panel this morning will be Ron Surfield from Edelman. We're very proud to have him here because he's a 2006 graduate of the MBA for Executives. So Ron, can you get things started?
Yep, sure. Thanks, Ellie. So first, it's great to be back in this building after quite a while. And I will say Eric Bradlow was one of my professors when I was here, and I ended up taking a lot more marketing classes than I expected coming in. And I use that stuff every day in my career and have ever since I graduated. So fantastic program, and I'm thrilled to be here today. So I work for Edelman. It's the world's largest PR firm. And public relations as an industry is shifting quite a bit over the last several years with the advent of digital and social media. And one of the things that we see pretty continuously these days is that public relations and public engagement as a two-way function now with social media is increasingly part of the marketing mix for clients, not just public relations in the traditional publicity sense, but really in terms of more of the advertising, marketing spectrum of activities that firms do. And typically our largest clients, the CPG firms, the global conglomerates that are marketing multiple brands of products to clients, to consumers and individuals, are struggling with where do they spend their money. That's not a new problem for marketers. That's an old problem. But how do they know what the benefit of social media is when it's very, very fuzzy and hard to tie directly to purchase behaviors? That problem gets even dimensionally more difficult when you're talking about a B2B marketer where the sales cycles are even longer, where there are many more influencers involved, and where the ability to tie directly to the transaction is usually very, very difficult. So I'm very interested to hear a little bit more about what our researchers have uncovered and what the approaches they are using are for figuring these kinds of problems out. Today we have Domingo Mora from the University of Massachusetts, and he's going to be speaking about co-exposure and advertising effectiveness. We have Eva Anderl and Jan Schumann from the University of Passau, speaking about the online customer journey and attribution modeling for online marketing, especially considering exposures across a multi-channel setting, which is directly in the realm of the problem set that I just described for our firm. We also have Andy Fisher from Merkle, and fair disclosure, Merkle is an Edelman client, and he'll be speaking as an expert from industry. And Jochen Talmon from intelliAd, also an expert from industry, but who participated with Eva and Jan on their implementation. So I'll let them introduce themselves. Jose?
Yes.
Please introduce yourself.
Oh, okay. I'm Jose Mora. I'm an assistant professor of marketing at the University of Massachusetts, Dartmouth. I'm an academic right now, but I come actually from industry. I have close to 15 years of experience in television and media planning and mostly audience measurement. So it was good to go into academia with that background. So I hope you enjoy what came out.
Eva?
Hi, I'm Eva Anderl. I'm a PhD candidate at the University of Passau in Germany and currently a visiting scholar at the University of Massachusetts, but in Boston, so it's a UMass panel today.
Hi, my name is Jan Schumann. I'm a professor of marketing and innovation at the University of Passau. I came in contact with this topic on a major project on the productivity of free e-services, and the ad effectiveness and ad efficiency is certainly one major driver of the productivity, and yeah, this is how I'm related to this topic.
My name is Jochen Talmon. I work with intelliAd. We are a multi-channel tracking provider, bid management, and trying to look at the user journey to find an attribution model for our clients, which are direct customers and agencies, where they can allocate their budget and how they can shift resources to be more efficient.
So hey, hi, I'm Andy Fisher. I'm Chief Analytics Officer for Merkle, and so I'm sort of the agency guy. in all of this, and so I'm trying to bring the perspective of a lot of the practitioners who are actually sort of doing this in the real dirty, messy world. My background is before this, I used to run global analytics for Starcom MediaVest and Razorfish and such. And so I've worked with I would say about 45 to 50 of the top global 100 advertisers on their media mix modeling and on their attribution. And so I can kind of bring some of that perspective to the discussion.
Great. Okay, I'm going to turn it over to Jose Domingo, who's going to review his research.
Thank you. Okay, I'll start by defining the context of this research. And the context of this research is basically context. It is the social context of exposure to advertisements, the social context of exposure to television. And by social context, we mean people who are watching with you. It's who is watching with you. And what are the effects of that? I mean, we've been counting heads and frequency at the individual level for too long and haven't taken the time to look at what happens when people are exposed with others. So this has begun to make inroads in the industry. This is an actual advertisement by Ion Television, recently published on Advertising Age. They have a number of claims as to why it is good to advertise on Ion Television. I'm going to zoom in so you can actually read what they claim. They claim that their audiences tend to watch together, to watch longer, and to watch more. That's what they claim. That actually matches previous research that we conducted. I conducted as a PhD student, and this is about co-viewing of television programs. When I say co-viewing, I'm referring to television programs. When I say co-exposure, I'm referring to television ads. So you are co-exposed to an ad or you co-view a program, right? So that's sort of the terminology we use here. So in this graph we have on the vertical axis the number of channels that people watch, and on the horizontal axis the actual TV consumption as a fraction of an interval of 15 minutes. So when people watch along, the husband and the wife and the kid, well, the mom and dad, they tend to watch, when they watch by themselves, a fairly large number of channels on average, actually much more channels than the child, and a bit more television is consumed. When they get together as a group of a parent, as a child, a single parent, either mom or dad and the child, or children together, well, this is what happens, right? Children increases the number of channels they watch, probably as a result of the influence of the adults, and there isn't much change in terms of the amount of television they watch. When they watch as a family, or when mom and dad are watching together, this is what happens. Actually, consumption goes up, and this is telling us, at least in principle, that co-viewing of television programs is different than non-co-viewing. The question is, does it matter for advertisers? Does it matter? Does it make a difference in the way people react to advertisements? Is this something that broadcasters can capitalize? Well, we formulated a hypothesis based on findings from neuroscience, in which has been very well established that positive mood enhances memory, even memory of past events. Meaning that if you show an advertisement, let's say 5 minutes before the happy ending effect will carry backwards to your advertisement. In the marketing and communication literature, it has been very well established that co-viewers feel happier as compared to lone viewers. Right? And finally, in the advertising literature, we find that ad-induced mood actually change the way you process the ad and also affect attitudes toward the brand. So our hypothesis, our only lonely hypothesis was, yes, there should be an effect. So that's, I don't think I'm gonna make it to any major journal with this hypothesis, but I probably need to write a bit more, right? So how do we attribute effects to solo exposure and co-exposure? How do we tease them apart? Well, we will need to observe exposure to advertisements and at the same time observe the consumption of advertised products. And besides, control for everything else, like pricing, distribution, and you name it, any other sort of environmental noise that may, let's say, bias your estimates of advertising effects. What is the answer to this? Well, the answer was right there before our eyes. Is, again, television panel data. Why? Because people consume television programs and broadcasters, they advertise their programs. So it's a setting, it's a nice setting in which you simultaneously observe what people consume and, of course, what sort of advertisements they were exposed to in relation to those programs. So, as you may know, in the television world, they call program advertisements, they call them promos. So when I say promos, it's an advertisement for a TV program. And we also observe this. And with regard to pricing, for instance, there is no pricing involved. You're basically, and this is for national broadcast TVs, so you are basically not paying for anything. And besides that, well, distribution is not a problem because the product is readily available. So even though this is real world noisy data, it is still a very nice specimen to study the effect of advertising on consumption. So we got data from Ibope AGV Mexico, which happens to be my former employer. We got data set from prime time, Monday to Friday. We had 17 weeks. We used 2 weeks for estimation purposes. You separate the sample into 2 subsamples. I'm not going to go into that. We observed 524 nuclear families. Nuclear families because in preliminary research we have found that family structure affects terribly the phenomenon of co-viewing, and it also affects terribly what happens with ad exposure. So we needed to sort of narrow down the scope to a single family structure. And well, we observed the promos. We also got the data on promos, and we gracias por los datos, Mexico. Thank you very much for the data. It's been very useful. So, model specification, we have a random parameters model, which is probably some of you are already familiar with this term. It's basically you control for a little ugly monster called unobserved heterogeneity, which is basically that people respond differently to the same stimulus. So when you have in a fixed parameters model, that fixed parameter is a very rough estimate of actually what's going on across the many people that makes up the sample. So this allows you to control for those effects and come up with estimates that are unbiased. The dependent variable is individual consumption of television, right? The independent variables, or the predictors, well, we created variables for lag, solo, and co-exposure to promos. We also control for ad elasticity. Basically, how many days had the program been aired. And believe me, this is a collateral but still interesting finding. If you don't control for ad elasticity, you get no effects in this context. I mean, it's imperative to do that. We also observe channels and program genres, viewer and household characteristics, day part is important. It's an inverse parabola, you know, earlier, and then it peaks around 9 p.m. and then it goes down. And finally, past consumption. As we all know, well, the best predictor of future consumption is past consumption, what you watched last week or what you were watching before the program started. So we control for a large number of variables based on the work of many empirical modelers who have been contributing to this literature for many years, Ron Shahar and the like. So how do we measure a number of viewers? Well, it's defining a group of viewers can be sort of messy. It's a fuzzy construct because people come and go, right? So the program lasts for half an hour, but you don't have everybody sitting before the program, before the TV set, sorry, for the entire half an hour. So we came up with this simple solution. We have these 4 guys watching this soccer game. Again, it's Mexico, so it's a soccer game. So number 1, number 2, number 3, and number 4. So let's suppose that number 2 and number 3, they watch the whole interval of 15 minutes. And number 1 and number 4 watch smaller fractions. So what I did was, well, let's create this measure called the number of equivalent viewers, in which the length of the viewing session is the maximum viewership. So the viewing session lasted for 15 minutes, and in those 15 minutes, in total, 45 minutes were watched. So I divide that sum, the sum of times watched by the maximum, and I get 45 by 15, 3 individuals, which graphically you may easily do the match from. You can take the 5 minutes from viewer 4 and complete a third viewer with the 10 minutes that viewer 1 watched. So it's not an ideal measure, but it's a very good approximation. Results, well, these are my results. I'm going to go in detail into each of the cells. I'm just kidding. That's just scary. I'm going to show you just the key findings. So the key findings are, well, things are different depending on what is the type of product that we are talking about. And this product is comedies. So, and we're going to see first the results for husbands and then the results for wives. And then I'm going to go to a second product, which is telenovelas, and I'm going to show you husbands and wives as well. So what you have on the far left is solo exposure, the standardized estimate for the effect of solo exposure. And then we have 3 standardized estimates for co-exposure with wife, with children, and with wife and children. Remember the first graph I showed you? It's group composition, right? So solo exposure contributes definitely positively to future consumption. The bar that you see emerging from the dot is basically the heterogeneity of the estimate over the population of viewers and different programs. Co-viewing with the wife and with the children also contributes positively. But if you are advertising for a new comedy show, well, you should avoid inserting your ads in slots in which the family are watching together, because the effects are really problematic. It's a negative estimate. It reduces the likelihood that people actually watch the program. The same pattern holds for wives in comedies, more or less, although the effect of solo exposure is even larger. Telenovelas is a different animal. Comedies are transmitted once a week. I mean, a different comedy for each day of the week, but each individual program is transmitted just once per week. Telenovelas are different. As you may know, telenovelas are the Latin American version of soap operas, so it's basically the same story, I mean, from Monday to Friday, every day for at least 120 episodes. It's not a surprise that for husbands there isn't much effect from both solo exposure and co-exposure with whoever, because we guys, we don't watch telenovelas. No, we do. Only we watch the ones that they want, the wife wants. For wives, well, solo exposure is important, but the most important contribution comes from watching the commercials with others, basically with husbands and with children. And again, we have, I think that this estimate is not significant, but still, the last one, husband and children, but still directionally negative, which again is consistent with what I showed you earlier. So, conclusions and next steps. First off, we believe television audiences are nice specimens for attribution models. Because they are, I mean, it's dirty real world data, but still it reads the data from a number of noisy variables that can obscure the effect of advertising. Our lonely hypothesis is partially supported. Co-exposure is good for some groups, not for all of them. And co-exposure is good for some products, not for all of them. One thing that we need to keep in mind is the limitation, I mean, the external validity of these results, how exportable they are to other product categories. The consumption of television programs is shared, just like the consumption of a vacations resort or a movie. So I would take the risk and say, well, maybe this operates as well for vacations, restaurants, or movies, but I wouldn't say the same for packaged goods, whose consumption is basically these are basically pure private goods which people consume individually and don't share. So more research is needed in that regard. And coming soon, I'm just letting you know that we are working on a second data set from Canada, and this is a very interesting data set because it is a portable people meter, and it's a different country with a much more individualistic culture, and we look very much forward to keep exploring and see what goes on there, if the effects hold also for this market. It is also a more recent data set, and Canada, it's from the media standpoint, much richer environment than Mexico. So it will be nice to see if the effects hold. And well, that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jose Domingo. Next up, Eva Anderl from University of Passau. This one? Good.
So thank you. I'm very excited to present our project called Analyzing the Customer Journey Attribution Modeling for Online Marketing Exposures in a Multi-Channel Setting today. As you can probably guess from the number of logos on this slide, I haven't been working on this all on my own, but with a number of colleagues. With Ingo Becker from the Technical University of Munich, from Florian Wangenheim from the Swiss Institute of Technology in Zurich, Switzerland, Jan Schumann from the University of Passau, who is with me on the panel today, and Franz Graf from intelliAd, our industry partner. Franz couldn't make it today, but his colleague Jochen Talmon is here and can talk a little bit about the industry side of our project. So, as you probably all know, marketers employ a variety of online channels such as display advertising, search engine marketing, Facebook ads, email, everything. So that's nothing new. And that means that people are exposed to a number of channels before actually making a purchase decision. That also is nothing new, because we have had TV and radio and print and online around all the time. But what's new is that with the new tracking technology, we can actually track this customer journey. So we know every single exposure a certain customer has before actually making a purchase decision. So for example, we have, if you look at the green line, we have a customer who might first click on a display ad, then see a Facebook ad, then a few days later go on a price comparison website, then stop for a little while, maybe contemplating his purchase, and then going on Google and looking for the product name or the company name, and then clicking on an organic search results, and then finally buying in the online shop. So the thing is, how can we actually attribute credit to those exposures along this journey? So we know there have been 4 exposures, but which one actually matters? So what is the partial value of each marketing contact that contributed to desired outcome? And lots of companies and lots of marketers know that are interested in that question and want to know how they can actually do that. But so far, many of them, and especially in small or medium-sized businesses, are still using very simple heuristics, such as last click wins. So it's only the last contact that actually gets all the credit. In this case, it would be the search engine, the search, and all the other ones would just be disregarded. And lots of marketers have uncertainties. They have questions how they should actually tackle that problem. And the question they're asking is, what are the criteria for a good attribution system? So maybe they're using last click wins. They know it's not quite right, it's not perfect, but they don't know what's better. And which is actually a good methodology to use to get a more correct attribution on value contribution. And finally, that's why we do all that stuff. How should we optimally allocate marketing budgets if we have the attribution results? What we try to do in our project is to provide some answers to these questions. We have developed a new attribution framework based on Markov graphs. We have developed a catalog of evaluation criteria for attribution modeling, and we have actually implemented it and in a real-life system together with intelliAd. So what do we do? The basic idea, and I'll just give you the basic idea and not bother you with all the equations and stuff, is to represent user journeys, customer journeys as Markov walks in directed graphs. And to provide fair attribution, which is crucial, especially given that topic, that approach is not absolutely new. It has been used in search engine marketing by Archak and colleagues. So we're not, but we are the first to actually apply it in a multi-channel context. In this Markov graphs, states correspond to channels in the easiest case. And edges correspond to to transitions between channels, and the edge weights correspond to transition probabilities. So if you look at the model on the left side, we have, in this very simple model, we would have 3 channels, channel 1, channel 2, and channel 3. And all these graphs are built on historical data. So we use a set of given customer journeys and then build the models based on that data. And this graph would mean that in 66% of the cases, journeys start with channel 1. And then 50% of the journeys just drop off and nothing else happens, so they just disappear. And the other 50% then sees an ad in channel 2. And in this special case, which is not very realistic maybe, all of the people who see an ad in channel 2 then see an ad in channel 3, and of those, 50% convert and 50% just end their journey and stop there. So building these graphs is a very nice way of aggregating data sets of really large sizes into a very small and practical and applicable model, so without losing too much information. Once we've built those graphs, we can then look at structural properties of the nodes. And as nodes correspond to channels, we can look at properties of channels. And we, especially with regard to attribution, we look at the so-called removal effect, which actually means that we ask what would happen if the channel wasn't there. So one by one, we pick one channel, take it out of the model, recalculate the conversion probabilities, put it back in, put the next channel out, put it back in, and so forth. So that's not actually how we calculate it, but that's the basic idea. And for example, on the slide, you see that what would happen if we would take out channel 1 and the change in conversion probabilities. To spice things up a little, we did not only calculate the simple models that you see there, but we also tried and tested higher order Markov models where we include some history in each of the nodes. So the decision which route I'm going to take is not only depending on the current channel I'm in, but also on what I've seen before. And we included the position in the journey in the state definitions, which allows us some insights into how do channels differ do channels work differently in the beginning of the journey or in the end or in the middle. And the higher order models give us some insights on how different channels work together if they interact in some way. In total, we have 16 different model types that we evaluated. We could do more, but we had to stop somewhere. So how can we know that what we do is actually better than just last click? So we invented a model and came up with a model, and now we have to evaluate it to find out if it's actually a good model. And what we did, we developed a catalog of criteria, of 5 criteria that we think every good attribution model needs to fulfill. And the first criterion is fairness, so the credit attribution in accordance with factual channel contribution. This sounds so obvious, but it isn't. For example, if you think about last click wins, you just make an assumption that all the other channels except for the last one don't matter. That doesn't seem to be very fair, at least to the other channels. We don't make any preliminary assumptions, so we just take every channel as it is and do not make any corrections or anything before we start building the model. The second is predictive accuracy. So for a model to be a good model, we think that it needs to be able to correctly predict conversion events. What we did, and we evaluated 4 real-life clickstream data sets, each containing at least 400,000 journeys, which is not very big, so they may become a little bit, they may become bigger in the future when we've tried bigger journeys, but that's what we included in this presentation. We evaluated them using a performance measure called area under the ROC curve, and did tenfold cross-validation and within and out of sample evaluation, so we did lots of evaluating. As a side note, we think it's important not to use standard performance measures such as percentage correctly classified in an area such as online marketing, because if you think about the conversion rates, if you have a conversion rate of, let's say, 1%, and if you just say, okay, we have no conversions at all, then you're correct in 99% of the cases, which sounds good, but isn't good at all. So we think we need to develop new, or not new, but different performance measures to actually measure how good attribution models work. And the third criterion that we're using is stability. So we want results to be reproducible. So if we want to base managerial decisions on these results, they shouldn't change. There should be no random variation in the results. We covered that by doing this tenfold cross-validation, where we split the data and then validate different splits to make sure that the results are actually stable. The fourth criterion is really important. It's algorithmic efficiency. So we're talking about tremendous data sets, and they need to be handled ideally in real time, because advertisers don't want to see the results in 2 weeks, they want to see them now, and depending on the application, they even want to see them in a few milliseconds. And that's why it's really important to have efficient algorithms. And last but not least, maybe even the most important criterion, we think, for an attribution model, which is to be used in practice, is that it needs to be understandable and easy to interpret. So nobody likes a black box. Nobody likes, in practice, nobody likes a model that you need a PhD in statistics for to actually understand what it does and to explain it to your boss and say, okay, I have no clue what's going on, but I think it's right. So we find it's very, very important to have a model that's easy to understand and to explain. And from our experience with the advertisers we talk to, our model seems, at least the basic idea that I explained to you, seems to be easy to understand. Just correct me if I'm wrong. So when we apply this model, do we actually see differences to the standard or the former standard of last click wins? Yes, we do. We see some significant differences. For example, if we used for this 2 data sets, one from an online apparel retailer and the other from a specialized retailer selling luggage. And we see, for example, for type-in, that it seems to be overestimated by the last click wins model quite a bit. So if we just use last click wins, we would say, oh, type-in works well. So people come by themselves. We don't have to do anything. They just enter a company name into the browser and they're there. And if you're using our model, then you see that type-ins lose and might not be as important as we thought before. Another example is SEO. SEO wins using our model, so SEO becomes stronger. Same goes for example, newsletter display on the left-hand side. But what we think is one of the most important lessons that you can get from this slide is that it would be rash to generalize results. So if you look, for example, at affiliate gains in the left model and loses in the right model. So if you would just say, oh, channel X is always more important than we thought, you would be wrong. Each advertiser has to calculate their own models based on their own channel set, based on their own situation, and recalculate it very often to actually be sure to get the right attribution. And we cannot generalize that we cannot draw any generalizable conclusions about singular channels just by analyzing one data set. So in case you wondered what such a graph looks like, that's how we end up. To sum it all up, what did we do? We provided a comprehensive set of evaluation criteria for a good attribution model. We presented a new attribution framework that we evaluated along those criteria. We actually implemented this model and applied it in practice at intelliAd, our industry partner, which is one thing that is special about this is that our model is applicable across industries and customizable in accordance with individual requirements. One other thing that we think is important is that we're very open about our methodology. So we actually tell what we're doing, which is something a lot of the commercial attribution models out there don't do. They just are somehow a black box that spill out results and you don't know how you get there. So our approach is very open. Once the model is implemented and we have the results, they can be used as a data-driven guidance for managerial and budget decisions. And finally, our model also looks promising for some other applications, such as real-time bidding, but that will be a different talk, I think. So that's it. Thank you for your attention, and I'm looking forward to questions.
Thank you, Eva. So first I'd like to talk about the range of the data that you all used for your research and how you feel about the breadth of the availability of data sets and the validity of the data.
Well, as I said in the presentation, I believe that this is a very useful little model of the real world that simplifies the, let's say, what happens in terms of marketing variables influencing purchase behavior. It narrows it down to what happens when you are exposed to an advertisement. And well, television data sets are not difficult to access. Many companies are willing to either share the data or sell it for very low prices, or simply give it away for academic purposes. And it's a matter of using this, as I call it, this specimen properly, right? Taking into account that, yeah, there are problems of external validity. Television programs are not like any other product, and whatever conclusion you arrive at, well, it should be preliminary and let's say contextualized. And but anyway, it's a wonderful way to get started with new things like this co-exposure phenomenon that otherwise would have been very difficult to study.
Jan, would you care to comment?
Yeah. When we started all this project, we were still looking for people that could even track those data. We found this great partnership with intelliAd who could, and I think the data that we can use for our model and test our model on are getting more interesting over time. So the model here only includes clicks, for example. We now also have access to views that people have and which they do not respond to. So this with regard to the data. Eva already said that the validity. I think the question here is rather a question of the validity of the model that we built based on those data. So all the data in general are only valid for this specific for one specific shop. So we cannot draw conclusions over different shops. What would be nice here is to actually validate the model with, for example, an experiment where we use the insights that we gain and then change the budget that the firm allocates, and then see whether we actually end up with more effective solutions. So this is a little bit a link to the first panel that we had, linking modeling with actual field experiments. Something we intend to do, but haven't done yet and cannot show you.
Maybe I can add a point to the data, which is comes from across industries, ranging from medium to large agencies. So I think the mix and the verifying the model over time, where we look at different attribution model, it will verify itself to some extent, because the data is a fair mix of different companies and providing different services, where also that attribution model itself, data like TV and print and radio comes into big play, where we not only focus on online data, also trying to implement in the attribution model offline data, which which is a very important factor, because I think TV is a very steady medium where there's no huge decline compared to print in the last 10 years, which is always kind of kept out in tracking and providing attribution to different departments, where we don't really want to compartmentalize different attributions to branding, and then also very sales-driven activities like search engine marketing.
Well, I don't have a lot to say about the data that they use because, of course, I'm not familiar with it, but I will latch on to a couple things. First off, a lot of times, a lot of this data does exist within the client agency framework, and and a lot of times those clients and those agencies are really reluctant to share that data in a more broad manner because they're just worried about what could be done with it, or even the perception of data sharing. So a lot of the advanced analytics really happens behind the scenes, and people don't really talk about it, right? The other thing I'll say is, to your TV point, global TV spend is actually increasing, and not only is it increasing, it's increasing as a percentage of the overall TV budgets. And you can see that from Zenith Optimedia forecasts, which you can Google and download, or I think you can buy the more expensive ones. So TV is actually is increasing. What's going on in the TV marketplace is that the audience is shifting from network to long tail, right? So the long tail guys are doing really, really well, and their audience is increasing, and the networks are kind of struggling a little bit. And you can see that happening as you watch the upfronts that are taking place in New York this week, and all the marketing and PR around that. So, but TV overall is increasing and still represents the majority of, or the largest channel that people are spending money on from an above-the-line marketing perspective. And I think the numbers are it's 33% TV, digital is around 14 to 15% if you look globally.
Can anyone comment on how indirect effects like social media, user-generated commentary, things that don't directly come from the advertiser or the source of the product or service, how do those affect your model and your approach to gathering the data and interpreting how that data affects the model?
Maybe I'll start off. I think the model is always as good as the data that comes in, and we're just relying on the tracking. So in the second you find a way of tracking those contacts in social media, so if somebody has been in contact with a brand on social media in user-generated content, if you find a way to track that, we can model it. The thing is, how can we actually track that in the way that we can currently track advertising exposures that are in some way controlled by the advertiser, where we can put in tracking pixels, where we can actually control how we measure it.
Mm-hmm. Feel free, Andy.
Okay, so that's the most important big topic right now today in the media mix and attribution industry.
Thank you. Yeah.
Right, just straight off the bat, I'll just say that. So let me just step back for a little bit and talk about media mix and attribution, and then we can talk about how some of these things connect. So media mix historically has been used to set channel allocation, so determine how much do you spend on TV, how much do you spend on radio, how much do you spend on print, and it's been going strong since the 80s. The media mix industry hit a real bump in the road when digital came out, because digital changed the mathematical framework of how these models work. And so let me give you an example. In the old world media mix models, the channels were independent. So watching TV didn't make you consume more radio. Now, there might be a TV radio halo, but you just model that as just another channel, right? Easy enough. What happens in digital is that television drives you to search. And so because you search, because more people are searching, and they're searching more on brand terms, right? Even if you're capped, even if your buy is capped, you're going to have a lot more traffic to your site. And because there's a lot more traffic to your site, suddenly your retargeting pool grows. And your retargeting cookie pool grows, and that changes the allocation of you from your direct buys to your programmatic buys, and so on and so forth. So suddenly all the media start interacting and start driving each other, right? And so because of that, the industry really had to take a couple years to begin to even get the mathematical framework to begin to describe that, right? And so that's the top down. Coming from the bottom up, the attribution industry really gets started around 2003, 2004, right? With some of the agencies doing one-off multi-touch point attribution. The ad servers pick it up. Some of the ad servers try and implement models. Other ad servers, like say a DoubleClick, they say, hey, it's your problem. Here's an API, here's the data. With those APIs, an industry then forms around that, and so attribution vendors start to emerge. As attribution vendors start to emerge, then all these other players in the space start to say, oh, we could do attribution too. So attribution then starts to appear in tag management systems, it starts to appear in web analytics tools, starts to appear in the data management and programmatic architecture. And so that's kind of where we are now in the industry. And the big trend in the industry now is, okay, how do you put those two pieces together? And can you do attribution and media mix modeling and put them all at the same time? And then how do you incorporate social into that? Mm-hmm. As you begin to incorporate social, a lot of advertisers are having some huge, spectacular successes and some big failures at incorporating social. The reason that you would incorporate social, number one, is to build a better model, right? And so it explains some variance. Two, to better value and understand social. And three, an area that's not really discussed, but is one of the primary drivers, these companies are spending tens of millions of dollars on brand tracking surveys. And so can they replace brand tracking surveys with a much cheaper social? So that's a key motivator. Mm-hmm. So what people are trying to do right now is they're trying to incorporate social into the top-down framework and really looking at it from an overall econometric perspective, and so incorporating sentiment, tweets, likes, blog mining into the overall econometric models, and then at the same time trying to join things into the attribution models through things like Facebook, Open Graph, and getting connected CRM data into those areas and trying to solve it at once. And there's been a number of successes, and then there's been a number of challenges. Coca-Cola just recently spoke at the ARF about the challenges they've had getting social and into their models, and they were unable to make social modeling. They were unable to make it predictive at this point. That's what they announced. But they're continuing to work on that, and that's just an enormous topic in the industry. Other companies, and I can't name them, have been able to make social predictive. A good area, an area where there's a lot of leading edge capabilities is in Hollywood. And the reason why is because every time someone goes to a movie, right, every ticket that they've bought, you've already spent every one of your marketing dollars before that first ticket is sold, right? So how do you forecast and optimize your media spend when you have no conversion data? Because all the conversion happens afterwards, right? Mm-hmm. And so Hollywood has become very advanced at leveraging social to actually become that predictor for box office success, and then leveraging social and mapping that to different media spends so that they can optimize the social response curves.
Thanks, Andy.
Sorry.
That's okay, that's good.
For the rant.
So that leads me actually to the next question I wanted to bring, and I'd like probably Eva to start with this one, which is the model which you have the representation of here up on the screen seems to account for a large number of complex interactions among a very, very complicated data set. And clearly that would be well positioned for large enterprise firms that can take advantage of big data. But do you have an opinion or a perspective on like a medium data application where SMEs or smaller marketers that aren't global enterprises can crack the code on effective attribution of multiple channels interacting without boiling the ocean, if you will?
Yeah, that's exactly what we are trying to do with that model. So we thought we need to find a way with data that is more or less easy to get. How can companies who do not have big analytics teams, who do not have exact brand measurements, all those other data that you could bring into more sophisticated models, how can they do attribution and just do better than just using this very simple heuristics like last click wins or just gut feeling. And we think that that might be a way that can be used by just, because that tracking data are more and more easy to get. And so if you just have that tracking data and put it in a model like that, then you can also already do much better than if you just use your gut feeling or just use simple heuristics. And that is maybe not the perfect model that you can come up with if you do lots of social media measurement and bring in TV and anything, but it's already much more than you can do without a model at all.
Mm-hmm. Jose?
I wanted to add a quick comment to Andy's remarks.
Sure.
It's with regard to social TV. This is a new buzzword that is around. And it's interesting because in our research, we have done some work on that and found that it is fair to say that all television is social, that the topology of television audiences is basically the topology of a social network, and interesting the availability of social media to interact with others while you are watching basically introduces sort of warps in this topological space. People and we create virtual living rooms. So we have virtual living rooms in which co-viewing transcends the actual living room. Co-viewing becomes a virtual phenomenon. So we have a bunch of co-viewers, and that's something we need to take into account.
Mm-hmm. And HBO Go and other platforms that provide that second screen content, when merged with a social media experience where people are, as you put it, participating in a social living room among their social network at the same time as the content's being streamed.
Yeah. And if I may add to it, it's important to recognize that social is both a response and a driver at the same time. Mm-hmm. And that's how people are really trying to manage it. There's a whole part of the industry that just looks at social behavior as the response, for example, right? So when you're trying to understand how well did your Super Bowl ad, right, work, people turn to Google Trends and people turn to Twitter. But at the same time, people are also looking at social as how does that drive sales? And the challenge is, how do you model it as both the response and the driver? And I think people are still trying to figure out what the functional forms of that are, and that's kind of the big thing the media mix modeling industry is trying to figure out over the next 2 years.
Mm-hmm. So in the context of that, then, how far away or how close are we to a more automatable or programmatically optimized marketing mix model that takes these things into account?
Well, okay. There's two things. The technology is growing. Things are becoming more programmatic. The programmatic buys, the programmatic industry is going up. One little trivia fact for the day, more money is likely going to be spent on programmatic buys in television than even in digital this year in the United States. So programmatic is increasing. That being said, I've worked with some of these Fortune 100 clients, and they'll have 400 or 500 different data sources. And those data sources are coming online, and new ones are being added every day. And so at the same time, you have this giant, massive fragmentation. So I would argue that the programmatic world is here to stay and is only going to grow. But at the same time, you're going to see sort of a bifurcation, where you're going to get more and more programmatic, where programmatic makes sense, and then you're going to get more and more custom content and custom integrations that are not programmatic. And the market will split like that.
Interesting.
Yeah, maybe I'd like to add some thoughts on. I think the previous panel, we had an interesting point with that one data point where you try to fit a slope into it. I think you cannot fully have fully automated models. If, for example, you add new channels then you have no data points at all. So what do you do? So you have to find a way of doing things, on the one hand, doing better attribution, doing better models to understand what has happened, but also to try to find new ways of bringing in new stuff that you don't know how they fit in. And so you cannot do a fully, I cannot imagine a fully automated world where there's no managerial decisions. It's just some machine doing everything.
Okay.
Yeah, it's also worth noting, economically, the fully automated world is not necessarily good from the premium content player, right? So if you're on the sell side of the business and you have a ton of available inventory, so you're, say, someone like a Facebook and you control a third of the available inventory in the US, and it makes a ton of sense to build FBX and build the exchanges. But if you're a premium player, you can, the spread between the bid and the ask right now in the current programmatic markets is so huge that you have all these other people in sort of taking your money, to the point where premium players like, say, BBC, for example, won't even participate in the programmatic markets. Mm-hmm. And so, you know, this programmatic doesn't necessarily make sense for everybody, and I don't think will continue. I don't think. I mean, you're never going to see an Olympic sponsorship bought programmatically, right? Well, you're never going to see the World Cup sponsored programmatically. Right, but sure, you'll see programmatic buys on all of the display inventory surrounding it.
The run of house stuff will continue to be moving that way. Yeah, interesting. Any other comments from our panel? Okay, I think we're just about out of time on the panel. So why don't we take a few minutes break and folks at the tables talk amongst yourselves, and then we'll take questions from the audience. Thank you. Are we on? All right, folks. If everyone can please quiet down, we'll go ahead and take questions for our panel from the audience. We have two ladies with microphones, one here in the front corner, one in the back. Go ahead and raise your hand if you have a question, and we'll have one of the microphones brought to your table. Okay, we have a question down here on the right. And please introduce yourself before asking your question. Thank you. Folks, if we could have some silence for the questions now.
We have a question over here. We're going to start asking questions to the panel.
My name is Rajiv Batra from the University of Michigan, and I have a question for Eva on the Markov graph approach. And the question is, I was struck by the one graph in which you contrasted your results with the last click results, and you had the bar charts. Yep. And it struck me that, with the exception of, I think it's an earlier one. Yeah, that one, I think.
This one?
Yes, that slide. With the exception of the first bar, which is the type-in, where it's a 44 versus 31 difference. The other ones are very small, the differences, 18, 19, 15, 16, 10, 12, 9, 11. So I'm wondering, are you surprised by the lack of a bigger difference between the results of the last click versus the very sophisticated Markov graph? Is it worth the effort?
It is worth the effort, and there's a very simple answer why the differences are so small. We, at the moment, for this slide, we only use click data and click journeys, and the click journeys we used are rather short. So you could see that in the bottom of the slides, that we had many very short journeys, and for short journeys that have just 1 or 2 clicks, they need to be the same as a last click model. Otherwise, we would have done something terribly wrong if we got completely different results. Once we have longer journeys, we have journeys including views, for example, the differences become much bigger. But that wasn't in a stage that we could show right here, but that's the reason why. So it's actually a good thing that for journeys that are shorter, the differences aren't too big.
Thank you.
Yeah, maybe I can add something. We see a lot of success with the different attribution model, last click versus really breaking it out. the longer the click chain is and the more channels are included. And that's also favorable for the company who is actually making a decision, because if you have only a couple channels, then the margin of error where you actually spend your money is not as important as if you have a long user journey, or especially a long user journey in terms of clicks and interaction, where social comes in and you have SEO, maybe a couple search engine marketing clicks at the end, and then the user journey goes above probably 5 plus 5 clicks, then the attribution model and an individual attribution model is more successful than a last click, or even a model what we are currently implementing is just weighing the different starting, middle, and end points.
Kirk Chaffetz from Story Worldwide. I wonder if you could address the following potential critique of this, and that is that you are focused on paid advertising insertions, measuring media spend, and apparently eliminating or not measuring all of the new forms of what I'll call non-paid advertising, the more editorial forms, posts on Facebook by brands, programming their own social channels, attracting their own audiences, that these have become important steps in many of the customer journeys that we see every day. And yet the money spent on that, because it's fees, not media, is not measured. The results of it are not measured, and they're not part of these models.
I think for us, it was important to track data that's accessible and user journeys, because along that user journeys, there are multiple interactions. And I think every model has those flaws in terms of brand interaction and how that interaction maybe influences an online search. But in terms of the user journey itself, every company and every organization has different goals. And for example, we even work with companies where the end goal is not to have any conversion at the end where it involves a checkout value. It can also involve an interaction like liking a post on Facebook or commenting on a news article. So we're trying to implementing those mediums through the essential conversion data and bringing that back. It could be even a phone call or an increased interaction after a TV commercial. So we're trying to implement those offline channels through trackable data. It is very hard, because that then also brings up the question of how will the future involve with tracking, and what are new methods that are accessible. And the more data we have, which really comes back to the quality of the input, because the higher the quality of the input, the better your output, and then the model really relies on that factor.
Yeah, and I'll answer this. That's why, as we see the industry going in the modeling we do, it's both the top-down and the bottom-up approach, because the top-down, trying to get at that from an econometric perspective, is one of the most essential things you can do. So for example, I've worked with clients where, global CPG clients, where they have 100 times more brand mentions than traffic to their website, right? And so for their perspective, their social programs and their social programs and their buzz monitoring is far more important than anything else that they're doing, right? And so that has already happened in our industry. People are still, I don't think that there's a formal way of where everyone's agreed about how we're going to do it. There's all sorts of problems right now. So a good example is when you try and do sentiment mining, right? The sentiment miners aren't very good yet, right? And so a good sentiment miner might get you 70% accurate, but 50% is a coin flip, right? You know, so that's an enormous problem. But yeah, that is the key thing. And I also want to expand it even further. So let's use it as an example. You're in the banking industry. I don't care what media you run. I don't care what you do online. If the Dow, the spread between the Dow and the prime rate goes like this, you're going to lose deposits, right? If you're in the cell phone industry, if you're a cell phone carrier, the iPhone 6 comes out and you don't carry it, your sales are going to crater. So you have to get all these externalities right. And in a lot of these industries, the externalities overwhelm the media driver by an order of magnitude. And so that's another whole area that you want to comment and bring up into the model. And that's why we really argue that you can't get at those kind of externalities if you don't understand the business. And so a big part of doing media mix modeling and attribution modeling well is really understanding the key business drivers there. And it's as much of an art form as it is a science.
Question down here. Go ahead.
Hi, I'm Chris from Marriott, and this is a question about the Markov model. I was wondering if you could expand upon the different state factors that the higher order models take into account. So for example, Andy was talking about interaction effects between channels. Those may be variable between channels. The importance of recency may be variable between channels as well. Are those things that your model can take into account? And as a question to the whole panel, what are the other modeling approaches that Merkle has worked with that can take into account some of these other factors as well?
So what the Markov model does take into account the higher order models is more history. So we can then say that we can then talk about sequences of channels. So we can say, for example, a display, channel 1 followed by channel 2 works better than channel 2 followed by channel 1. What we at the moment cannot do is interaction effects between channels that are further apart than the order of the model. So that's our limitation. But at the moment, we go up to the 4th order, so we can talk about sequences of 4 channels, which is quite a lot. And we see that's actually where it's getting interesting. When you see the differences, which channel works with which channel, how do, for example, does channel 1 work with channel 2, and channel 2 does not work with channel 1. So that's where you have to get into it and really see how your customer journeys and how your customers come to you as a company. Does that answer your question?
So, so from a broader perspective too, Markov modeling is a common technique that is used in some of the other tools too. The other common techniques include just bringing in non-converter data and building logistic regression models, right? Those techniques were sort of lifted from the 1970s panel approaches. There's a whole intelligent agent class of these models that are used, and they sort of come in and out of favor as intelligent agent becomes cool and not cool. Another area is you just see a lot of rules-based and attempts at validating those rules. A big challenge with a lot of these things too is how do you make them useful, right? And so, for example, it's great if I can understand the flighting of the media and use that to build a better model, but I can't flight it that way when I actually go and buy it, right? Because so much of this media is, in a sense, user flighted, right? Or so much of it is dependent on how the publisher's ad server works. So what can I actually use within these models? And that's a really important thing to understand. And then just as a shout out, you're a client, we're working on your attribution. So, so yeah, there's a number of different ways to do this where I don't think the industry has settled on. I don't think the industry has settled on one, and I hope that there's more exploration and more new and exciting things happening in this space.
Yeah, and then one point I would like to add is you also have to come from the perspective that not everybody is fortunate enough to hire Merkle to do the data analysis, which kind of brings up the point of decisions have to be made quickly. And I don't know, if you guys are doing an analysis, how long that will really bring up the results. So the companies we are working with, where it really is, it's a more simplified model, but the benefits are really making a decision fast on real-time data, plus you really have it accessible to a large audience. Because if you think about a company maybe managing 5 to 10 million in ad budget per month, they can afford a statistical department. They really need a tool to make a decision fast and very economical, because that's also a factor that comes into play with a model where you could spend millions and millions in analysis, but if your return on investment is not, really doesn't justify the investment, then that doesn't make sense. But I think a lot of companies, they like to really emphasize an analysis, but the return is actually negative, so that's a factor you really need to take into consideration.
Thank you. Another question? Down here in front.
Hi, this is Ranjit Labatkar with Intuit. I had a question, a couple of questions. One was, were you including display impressions, not clicks, but impressions as a marketing touch point in your modeling? And how were you treating conversion paths which didn't have any marketing touch points? And were those being used to kind of form a baseline conversion probability and assigning just the incremental effect to the marketing touch points?
So we did include display impressions, but not on this slide. So the analysis you saw on the slide were just clicks, but we have done the model with display impressions as well. And we do not have conversions without any further data, because we are also including direct type-ins, and somehow the people have to get on the website. So there's at least one single touch point for each conversion, because I haven't seen people just converting without going on a website and clicking on a purchase button. So that's...
Yeah, my question was for those direct type-ins, kind of is that treated as an inherent conversion rate of customers, and then just calculating incremental effects for conversion paths which had marketing touch points?
No, that's not, because we see the direct type-ins all along the customer journey. So we have to include them in the analysis and cannot use them as a baseline. Because we see, for example, a click on an ad, then we see a direct type-in, then we see another click on an ad, and then another direct type-in, and we have to include that in the journeys to make sense of the journeys.
Great. I think we have a question down here in front, and can we get a microphone down here as well? Yeah, go ahead.
Kirill Semikman from intelliAd Science. Maybe adding some to a critique, and would like to understand better. How do you validate any kind of attribution model? What do you call a successful model? That's one thing. Second thing is, how do we bridge the I feel a gap between this panel and previous panel? The previous panel was all about causality. What's actually the causal effect of any of the efforts? And this is essentially modeling that. I don't see how it actually takes into account or describes any causal effects.
Speaking from a practical perspective, I think the validation comes from an implementation perspective, because for our goal, and also having accessible different attribution models along that user journey for different company types. And their validation really comes through an net increase in revenue, really seeing a positive impact on their overall growth.
So I'm going to take kind of a different position than that. I see no distinction between this panel and the panel before, because I argue that any econometric modeling approach must include a validation step. And it was that validation step that blew apart the classical econometric models in the TV space back in 2002, 2003, when things became non-predictive. So anytime you're doing any kind of modeling work, you have to have some form of validation, and test design, good test design, is a great form of validation. And so in my mind, and what we see our clients doing is, you build the model, you have a validation strategy, you validate the model by using it to forecast what will happen within your tests. You run the tests, you see if they come close to your forecast, and you're happy, and you go on that way. And it was 20 years of doing that then just stopped working in the television space. And it's not really that much different in this space. The key is to be able to actually validate and test things that you can control, right? It's very hard to validate, say, the time between a click and an impression and whether or not that is predictive. But if you're validating whether or not you should pursue a particular strategy, such as shifting search to retargeting budget, you can do that with the test methods. But it's essential that you build that validation step into the entire process.
And maybe another link to the previous panel is that it would be great to do some experiments on that multi-channel online marketing, but it would be really, really difficult to set up such an experiment, because we saw that even for modeling or getting a grip on what one channel does, you had to have, I think, more than 1 million customers included in an experiment. Just think about what you would need to include if you want to model 7 different channels, and then you would have to turn them off and on and to get all the data you actually need. So
you could start with just one channel.
Yeah, but it's difficult to actually get an advertiser to turn off a very profitable channel. So we've tried, but it's not easy.
Yeah. The other thing too is it's very channel dependent. So I still argue that you have to do exactly that and do see these sub-tests within all these different channels. But there are certain channels, for example, like search. It's very hard to do an A/B test in search, right? At least the way search is actually bought and implemented today. So you wind up doing these one-off things with panel data or search retargeting tools, or this. So there's a whole variety of validations, but some of which are sort of are solid and concrete and scientifically sound, and then some of them are kind of squishy. But you still have to do them.
Question down here?
Yeah, thank you. Igor Mandel, Telmar. 3 questions. First is to the first presenter. How do you explain the strange effect that when husband is looking for something with children, so it's higher, but all family with the same husband goes below? Like, what kind of interaction between family members you put as an explanation? Because it was observed all the times, right? And secondly, it's a question to you, to the second presenter. What was the criteria to select people to make your attribution model? Whom you picked up? Those guys who clicked on something? Like, did you consider endless number of customers who went through any of those nodes on the web but end up with nothing? What exactly was the definition of your population in order to say this is conversion rate, among whom conversion rate? And general question to everyone, there is a big bunch of so-called causal modeling in statistics. It's a boom in statistics, but I haven't seen that in practical modeling where I belong to myself. I mean works by Rubin, Pearl, on all others, etc., etc. And question, did you use somehow all those things because it is developed as an alternative to traditional regression and any other types of modeling? Thank you.
Did you get all that, Jose?
Okay, yes. A preliminary explanation for those, let's say, paradoxical results is the dynamics of these groups. It's basically when the whole family is together There is this theory of social uses of television in which has been shown, it was basically literature published in the 80s. It has been shown that when the family is together, during commercial breaks, people interact, people talk, people do such and such. When the whole family group is not together, somehow that magic breaks apart. And well, they watch together, but what happens is that the effect of the mere presence of others is what pushes, what heightens affect and may explain what is going on. So it's a matter of, yeah. Well, it's a hypothesis. It's a hypothesis. It's a correlational model, and so it's a preliminary explanation of what could be happening. And it's also based on, well, observational research in ethnographies that I mentioned earlier. And apparently that's not the case when dad is with the kids or dad is with the, or mom is with the kids. So it's a matter of group dynamics. There is something in there that needs to be further explored. Okay, welcome.
Jan?
Yeah. An answer to your second question, what is the population? Yeah. It's cookie-based data, so everybody who has at least one contact with that company and gets a cookie is in that model, and this is and the data are collected over a certain time span.
Which means if I click on what? On add, this is what I'm considered cookie or what?
Right. As Eva said, if you have a direct type-in or if you click on an ad, then you include it in that model.
Okay. I click on it, and then you trace all my links before which happen to be this me, correct?
Yes, we track your interaction, and the company selected for the model itself, where we saw that there's a chain length of multiple interactions over a certain time frame. So they go from coming maybe to a social media channel, then they're taking another step, searching for the product or service, and then they're essentially clicking on a paid ad. They might go to the website, they look at the product, abandon the shopping cart, and then 2 days later they click on another paid ad. That would be an example of a user journey.
Any interest in the web, and then you start to look at it.
And not just to the web either. I think the industry is coped with making sure that cross-device correlation is also established.
There's also a class of analytics that works on panels, where you can get a much richer set of data about a much larger set of behaviors for a smaller self-selected set of people, right? So, and in the panel case, so I think your question was about, I heard the word before, right? In the panel case, you can talk about the before because you have that information. In the ad server case, you generally can't, right? And so it just depends on who's doing it. And we haven't really discussed the panel approaches to attribution modeling because there are all sorts of interesting things that you can do with the panel, like connect the actual Facebook post or connect the actual search impression to that particular panelist because they're giving you that data, and then you can do the analysis that way. But then that has a whole other host of issues like sample bias, and you're using a panel, so it's small. It's maybe only 100,000 event streams.
Thank you. That'll be our last question. I'll turn it back over to Ellie. Well, we're out of time, but feel free to follow up on that over lunch. On behalf of the Wharton School, I'd like to thank our panelists, Jose, Eva, Jan, Jochen, and Andy. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much. That was great, Ron. So lunch.